Welcome to another deep dive where we get to really dig into some fascinating ideas. Now, today we're not just talking about bouncing back from tough times, just being resilient. We're exploring how to actually benefit from disorder, like
Eh,
actually using those difficult situations to our advantage.
Sounds kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought too. But that's what we're going to explore today.
All right, I'm game.
So, the idea we're diving into is this concept called antifragility.
And to help us wrap our heads around it, we're using Nassim Taleb's book, Antifragile, as our guide.
Exactly. We've got a detailed summary ready to break down the key ideas and, really try to make this practical.
Because who doesn't want to be able to actually benefit from chaos?
Right. It sounds kind of counterintuitive. I mean, most of us are trying to avoid chaos.
Yeah, exactly. But Taleb makes a pretty compelling case that maybe we should be embracing it, at least to a certain extent.
All right, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's define what we're talking about here. What exactly is antifragility?
But one way to think about it is to contrast it with fragility.
Okay, so fragile things, they break easily under pressure.
Right. And then you've got resilient things. They can withstand shocks and kind of bounce back to their original state.
Like a rubber ball.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But anti-fragile things are different. They don't just bounce back, they actually get stronger from those shocks.
So it's like they're using those disruptions to level up.
Exactly. It's like a weightlifter, right? Every time they lift, they're causing tiny tears in their muscles. But instead of those tears just being patched up, the body overcompensates. It rebuilds the muscle stronger than before.
So it's not just about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward.
Precisely. And, this concept is all around us. Think about evolution. It's driven by organisms adapting and improving in response to environmental pressures. The ones that can't handle the stress, they don't make it.
Survival of the fittest.
Exactly. So how can we translate this idea of anti-fragility into something practical, something we can use in our own lives?
Well, Taleb talks about something called the barbell strategy, which I'll admit sounds a bit intimidating.
It's a bit of a catchy name, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it does sound like something you do in the gym.
But it's actually a really interesting concept. So imagine a barbell. You've got weight on either end, but nothing in the middle,
Right?
right?
Okay, I can picture that.
The barbell strategy is about applying that same idea to your actions and your choices. So you're essentially splitting your efforts between two extremes.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me a real-world example. How would someone actually use the barbell strategy?
Let's say you're managing your personal finances.
All right, relatable.
So following the barbell strategy, you might put 80% of your money into ultra-safe investments, like bonds.
Okay, so that's one end of the barbell, playing it safe with most of your resources.
Exactly. You're minimizing the risk of catastrophic loss, but then the other 20%.
That's where things get interesting.
Exactly. You take that portion and you dedicate it to high-risk, high-reward ventures.
So like investing in a brand new startup or exploring a volatile market?
Precisely. These are things that could potentially lead to massive gains, but of course they also carry a bigger risk of loss.
So you're essentially saying, don't be afraid to dabble in the stuff that could go either way.
Exactly. You're diversifying your risk so that even if one area is hit hard, you're not wiped out completely.
That makes sense. So it's not about avoiding risk altogether. It's about managing it in a way that allows you to benefit from those potential big wins.
Right. And this is where Taleb's idea of black swan events comes in.
Okay, black swan events. Remind me what those are again.
So these are unpredictable, high-impact events that completely change the game. Think about the dot-com bubble, the 2008 financial crisis, even the recent pandemic.
Those are some pretty big examples.
Yeah, and they highlight the fact that we can't predict everything. With the barbell strategy, you're not trying to predict those black swans. You're creating a system that can actually benefit from them.
Okay, so you're acknowledging that those unpredictable events are going to happen. But instead of being paralyzed by that fear, you're building a system that can roll with the punches and maybe even come out stronger.
Exactly. It's about having that 80% stability to weather the storm, and then that 20% that's positioned to potentially capitalize on those unexpected shifts.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how this whole anti-fragility thing works. It's not just about being tough, it's about being adaptable and using those challenges to your advantage.
Exactly. And there's another element of Taleb's thinking that really ties into this. It's the idea of skin in the game.
Okay, skin in the game. That sounds interesting. What's that all about?
It's all about accountability. It's about making sure that the people making decisions are exposed to the consequences of those decisions.
So if you're the one making the call, you should also be the one who feels the impact if it goes wrong.
Exactly. Think about it. When you're making a decision that only impacts yourself, you're naturally going to be more cautious, more thoughtful, right? because you have something to lose.
That makes sense. You're not going to gamble with your own well-being.
Exactly. And Taleb argues that when there's no skin in the game, you get recklessness.
So you're saying that people are more likely to make risky decisions if they're not the ones who have to deal with the fallout.
Exactly. Think about financial advisors who get commissions regardless of whether their clients make or lose money.
Do they really have their clients' best interests at heart?
That's the question, right?
Hmm.
Or consider politicians who enact policies with no real understanding of how they'll impact everyday people.
So skin in the game is about aligning incentives, making sure that the people who make the decisions are also the ones who feel the effects.
Precisely.
Mm.
And it's not just about avoiding bad decisions. It's also about fostering innovation and responsibility. When people have something to lose, they're more likely to be creative to find solutions that benefit everyone involved.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together. We've got the barbell strategy for managing risk skin in the game, for promoting accountability, and all of this is leading toward becoming anti-fragile.
That's it.
Wow.
We're building systems in our lives and in society that can benefit from disorder from unexpected challenges. It's a pretty radical shift in thinking,
Yeah.
but I think it's got a lot of potential.
Okay, so we've laid a good foundation here. We've defined anti-fragility, we've talked about the barbell strategy and skin in the game, but Taleb throws another curveball our way with this concept of via negativa.
Oh yeah, via negativa. This one is interesting. It's kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, it seems like he's always throwing curveballs.
He likes to keep us on our toes. So what's via negativa all about?
Well, it's about the power of subtraction.
Subtraction.
Yeah, we're so used to thinking about adding and building up, but sometimes the most effective path to improvement is actually by removing things.
So instead of adding more, we should focus on taking away.
Exactly. What can you subtract to improve?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And it can apply to so many areas of life. Think about your health.
Okay, so instead of constantly searching for the next big supplement or, the latest biohacking trend.
What if you just focused on eliminating processed foods from your diet?
Okay, so simplifying things, getting back to basics.
Exactly. Or in a business, instead of adding another layer of bureaucracy, what if you streamlined processes and got rid of all those unnecessary meetings?
It's like decluttering your life, making space for what truly matters.
Precisely. And this applies to our mental and emotional lives, too.
So like letting go of toxic relationships or negative thought patterns.
Exactly. Via negativa challenges us to ask, what can I stop doing to create a more anti-fragile life?
It's a really interesting way to reframe things, shifting the focus from what we can add to what we can subtract.
And it can be incredibly powerful. Sometimes the things we don't do have a much bigger impact than the things we do.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already. We've defined anti-fragility. We've talked about the barbell strategy, skin in the game, and this idea of via negativa. But there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to explore, and that's the Lindy effect.
Ah, yes, the wisdom of the ancients.
Exactly. This one seems like it has a lot to do with how we evaluate ideas and make decisions, especially in a world where everything seems to change so rapidly.
Now, we're constantly bombarded with new information, new trends, new technologies. It can be hard to know what's actually valuable and what's just noise.
So how does the Lindy effect help us with that?
Well, the Lindy effect basically states that the longer something has survived, the more likely it is to continue surviving.
So it's like a measure of its staying power.
Exactly. It's almost like a grandpa test for ideas, institutions, practices.
If it's been around for a long time, there's probably a good reason for it. It stood the test of time.
Precisely. Think about classic literature that continues to resonate with readers centuries later. Or philosophies like Stoicism that have guided people for generations. Or businesses that have thrived for decades, even centuries.
These things have proven their worth over time.
Exactly. They've weathered countless storms, and they're still standing. So the Lindy effect invites us to look beyond the hype and consider the long-term value of something.
So when we're making decisions about what to invest our time, energy, resources into,
We should definitely factor in the Lindy effect. It can be a powerful lens for evaluating everything from investments to career choices to personal beliefs.
so we've got this whole spectrum of systems, right? We've got fragile systems that break under pressure, resilient ones that just bounce back, and then we've got the anti-fragile ones.
The ones that not only withstand challenges, but actually use them as fuel for growth.
They become stronger, more capable than they were before. It's a pretty mind-blowing concept when you really think about it.
Imagine applying this to your own life. How could you structure things to not just withstand setbacks, but actually gain from them?
That's a great question to consider. And I think it speaks to the power of this whole anti-fragility concept. It's not just about surviving. It's about thriving in a world that's constantly throwing us curveballs.
And maybe even using those curveballs to our advantage.
Exactly. Now, I know this is a lot to take in, but I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding the key principles of antifragility. And the best part is this is just the beginning of our exploration. We've got two more parts to this deep dive where we'll really start to unpack how to apply these ideas to our own lives.
There's so much more to explore. But for now, I want you to think about this.
Yeah.
If you were to apply the via negativa approach to your own life today, what's one thing you could subtract to become more anti-fragile?
That's a great question to ponder. And we'll pick up right where we left off in our next part, so stay tuned.
That via negativa thing, it's really got me thinking. It's funny how we're always so focused on adding more to our lives.
Right. Always trying to do more, be more, have more. It's like this constant pressure.
And then this idea comes along and says, hey, what if you tried subtracting instead? Like, what if less is actually more?
It's definitely a shift in perspective. And I'm even thinking about my own life right now. My to-do list is a mile long. I'm constantly running from one thing to the next.
I think a lot of us can relate to that as just the way we're conditioned to live these days.
But via negativa makes you stop and think, what if I'm actually making things harder for myself by trying to do too much?
Right. What if all that extra stuff is actually weighing you down, preventing you from really focusing on what matters?
So how do we figure out what to let go of? I imagine that could be pretty tricky.
It's not always easy, but I think a good starting point is to identify the things that are draining your energy, your time, your resources.
Without giving you much in return.
Exactly. It might be a toxic relationship, a bad habit, a commitment that's no longer serving you, or even just clutter.
Both physical and mental.
Precisely. And speaking of mental clutter, one of the things that really struck me about Taleb's book is his critique of over-intervention.
Over-intervention.
Yeah, especially in areas like health and medicine.
Okay, that's interesting. Because usually we think of intervention as a good thing, right? Like, we want to fix problems, we want to make things better.
Right. But Taleb argues that sometimes this fix-it mentality can actually make us more fragile.
Okay, that seems counterintuitive. How does trying to improve our health potentially backfire?
Well, think about our immune systems. They're designed to be exposed to germs, to challenges, so they can build up defenses.
Right. We need to be exposed to a little bit of dirt to build up those antibodies.
Exactly. And if we're constantly trying to eliminate every single germ, we're actually weakening our immune system's ability to do its job.
So it's like those kids who grow up in super clean environments, and then they get hit hard by the first cold they encounter.
Exactly. They haven't had a chance to develop their natural defenses.
So in trying to eliminate all risk and discomfort, we might actually be making ourselves more vulnerable in the long run.
That's like a paradox, right?
Right.
And this applies to other areas of life, too.
Like what?
Well, in finance, you see it with overregulation that can stifle innovation. In education, you see it with overprotective parenting that can prevent kids from developing resilience.
So it's about finding that balance between protecting ourselves and allowing ourselves to be exposed to a little bit of risk, a little bit of challenge.
Right, because that's how we grow. That's how we become stronger.
So how do we know when to intervene and when to let things run their course?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But I think a good starting point is to ask ourselves, what can I stop doing that might actually be making things worse?
So it's about challenging those ingrained assumptions, those automatic responses.
Exactly, and recognizing that sometimes less is more. Sometimes the best way to strengthen a system is to allow it to experience a little bit of stress, a little bit of disorder.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together, but it's still a pretty big concept. How do we start to apply these anti-fragile principles to our own lives?
Well, one practical takeaway from Taleb's work is to think about your life as a portfolio.
A portfolio.
Yeah, just like a financial portfolio. But instead of stocks and bonds, you're thinking about your experiences, your relationships, your skills.
So you're saying we should diversify our lives, just like we diversify our investments.
Exactly. You want to have a mix of safe bets and risky ventures. Remember the barbell strategy.
Right. So maybe that means taking on a challenging project at work, even if there's a chance of failure, or trying a new hobby that pushes you outside of your comfort zone.
Exactly. And remember, failure isn't the opposite of success. It's often a stepping stone to it. Anti-fragile systems need those small failures to learn and adapt.
So it's not about avoiding failure altogether. It's about embracing it as part of the process.
That's a great way to put it. It's about reframing failure as feedback, as an opportunity to course correct and improve.
I like that failure is feedback. It takes some of the sting out of it.
Right, and it makes it seem less like something to be feared and more like something to be learned from.
So it's about shifting our perspective from one of fear to one of opportunity.
Exactly. Instead of seeing challenges as threats, we can start to see them as chances to grow, to evolve, to become stronger.
Now, that's a powerful mindset shift. But let's be real, embracing uncertainty can be scary. I know I often find myself wanting to cling to what's familiar, to what feels safe, even if it's not necessarily serving me.
That's completely understandable. We're wired for comfort and security. It's a survival mechanism.
But if we want to become anti-fragile, we need to be willing to step outside of that comfort zone.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of skin in the game comes in.
Mm.
When you have something to lose, you're naturally more invested in making thoughtful decisions.
So it's not about being reckless or jumping into every risky venture that comes your way.
No, it's about calculated risk-taking. It's about understanding the potential downsides, but also being willing to embrace the potential upside.
And it's about surrounding yourself with people who also have skin in the game. People who are accountable, who are willing to learn, who aren't afraid to take risks,
Exactly, because those are the people who will help you become more anti-fragile.
both individually and collectively.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Anti-fragility isn't just about individual strength. It's about building systems, organizations, even societies that can benefit from disorder.
Okay, so how do we apply this to the bigger picture? How do we create more anti-fragile systems?
Well, think about startups, for example. They're often more nimble, more adaptable than established companies, precisely because they're willing to experiment, to fail fast, and to learn from those failures.
They have to be adaptable because they're operating in such a volatile environment.
Exactly. They have a lot of skin in the game, so to speak.
Mhm.
And that adaptability is essential in a rapidly changing world.
It's not just about surviving, it's about thriving amidst the chaos.
Exactly. It's about using those unexpected events, those challenges, to propel ourselves forward,
Yeah.
innovate, to create, to evolve.
So if we want to foster more anti-fragility, we need to create environments that encourage experimentation learning and, yes, even a bit of healthy risk-taking.
I think that's a fantastic point. It's about shifting our mindset from one of fearing uncertainty to one of embracing it as a catalyst for growth.
I like that. Embracing uncertainty as a catalyst for growth, it's almost like reframing the entire way we think about risk and reward.
Instead of trying to control everything, we can learn to dance with the unknown.
And that's a beautiful image, because when we let go of that need for absolute control, we open ourselves up to a world of possibility.
We allow ourselves to be surprised, to be challenged, to be transformed.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired.
Hmm.
But I'm also wondering, how do we actually put all of this into practice? How do we start to shift our thinking to move away from fragility and toward anti-fragility?
Well, one practical step is to start asking different questions. Instead of asking, how can I protect myself from risk? Ask, how can I benefit from uncertainty?
Ooh, I like that. It's like flipping the script, turning the whole idea of risk on its head.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that embracing anti-fragility doesn't mean being reckless. It's still about calculated risk-taking, understanding the potential downsides, but also being open to the potential upside. And it's about continuously learning and adapting based on the feedback you receive.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between caution and courage.
That's a great way to put it. It's about embracing the unknown, not with fear, but with curiosity and a willingness to learn and grow.
Now, we talked earlier about the Lindy effect and how it can help us evaluate ideas and practices that have stood the test of time. How can we apply that concept to this whole idea of anti-fragility?
That's a great question. And I think the connection is quite profound. If we look at the principles of antifragility through the lens of the Lindy effect, we see that they're not new or trendy ideas. They're actually rooted in ancient wisdom.
So these ideas have been around for a long time.
Think about the Stoic philosophers who emphasize the importance of accepting what we can't control and focusing on what we can.
That's essentially skin in the game, isn't it?
Exactly. And Via Negativa has echoes in many spiritual traditions that emphasize the power of letting go, of simplifying, of stripping away the non-essential.
So these ideas have been around for centuries, for millennia, precisely because they work.
They've helped individuals and societies navigate uncertainty and emerge stronger on the other side. They've stood the test of time.
So the wisdom of the ancients can actually help us navigate the complexities of modern life.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really empowering realization. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can draw upon the wisdom of those who came before us, who faced their own challenges and found ways to thrive.
It's like we're part of this long lineage of human resilience, of human ingenuity.
And by tapping into that lineage, we can access a deep well of strength and wisdom.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think it speaks to the core of what anti-fragility is all about. Not just surviving, but thriving, evolving, and becoming more than we ever thought possible.
Now, how does all of this apply to the bigger picture? I mean, we've been talking about personal anti-fragility, but what about systems, organizations, even societies? Can they be anti-fragile too?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thinking about those bigger systems, like I've been thinking about government, it seems like so much of how things are set up now, it's all about control and stability.
Right, keeping things predictable, keeping things the same.
But that kind of goes against everything we've been talking about with anti-fragility, doesn't it?
It definitely raises some questions
Mm.
because as we've seen, those systems that are built on control, they can actually become more vulnerable in the long run.
Because they're not able to adapt when things change.
Exactly. And Taleb actually argues that large centralized governments are inherently fragile for that very reason. They try to control so much.
So many moving parts.
Yeah, they create these complex interconnected systems.
Yeah.
And as we've seen time and time again, when one part fails, the whole thing can be thrown into chaos.
It's like a domino effect.
Exactly. And this tendency toward over-centralization,
Yeah.
trying to control every aspect of society, it can actually stifle innovation and make us more vulnerable to those black swan events.
Those unexpected disruptions that we talked about earlier.
Precisely. The ones that no one sees coming, but they can have a huge impact.
So, if we want to create more anti-fragile governments, what's the alternative? Do we need to completely rethink the way our societies are structured?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily about completely overhauling everything. It's more about shifting our perspective, instead of trying to control everything from the top down.
Right, like a command and control approach.
Yeah, we can focus on creating systems that are more decentralized, more flexible, and more adaptable to change.
Okay, so can you give me an example of what that might look like in practice?
Sure. Think about the way we approach disaster relief.
Okay, good example.
Often the most effective responses come from local communities who are able to quickly assess the situation and mobilize resources without waiting for instructions from some central authority.
They're already there. They know what's needed.
Exactly. They're closer to the problem, they understand the needs of their community, and they're able to act quickly and decisively.
It's like that old saying, think globally, act locally.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. By empowering those local communities to take ownership, to make decisions,
We create systems that are more responsive, more resilient.
and ultimately more anti-fragile.
So instead of one big centralized authority, it's more like a network of interconnected communities.
Right. It's about recognizing that true strength comes from diversity, from multiple perspectives, and from that ability to adapt and evolve as circumstances change.
So it's about letting go of that illusion of control a little bit and embracing the inherent uncertainty of life.
Exactly. And that actually ties back into that idea of skin in the game that we talked about earlier.
Right, because when decisions are being made by people who are directly affected by those decisions,
They're going to be more invested in finding solutions that work for everyone.
they're not insulated from the consequences.
Exactly. They're not going to make decisions that only benefit themselves at the expense of others.
So how do we start to actually shift our thinking in this direction? I mean, it seems like such a big task to try and change the way these big systems operate.
It's definitely a big challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. I think it starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own actions and choices.
So starting with ourselves.
Yeah, it's about becoming more aware of the systems that we're a part of and questioning the assumptions that underpin those systems. It's about demanding more transparency and accountability from our leaders. And it's about supporting those initiatives that promote decentralization, diversity, resilience.
So it's about working to change the system from the inside out, starting with ourselves and our own communities.
Exactly. And remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process that requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to experiment and to learn from our mistakes.
It's a journey.
Exactly. And speaking of journeys, I think we've come to the end of ours for today.
Wow, that went by fast.
Time flies when you're exploring complex systems.
It really does. So as we wrap up this deep dive into anti-fragility, I just want to say how much I've appreciated this conversation. It's really challenged my own thinking.
So we love to hear.
It's made me question a lot of my assumptions about the world and how we can create a better future.
I think that's the power of this concept of anti-fragility. It really forces us to rethink the way we approach risk, uncertainty, and change.
And it gives us a framework for not just surviving, but actually thriving in a world that's constantly throwing us curveballs.
So to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to take these ideas and explore them further. See how you can apply these principles of anti-fragility to your own life, to your work, and to the world around you.
Because remember, this journey toward anti-fragility, it's a continuous one. There will be setbacks, there will be challenges, but that's all part of the process.
It's through those challenges that we learn, we adapt, and we become stronger.
So don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to fail. And most importantly, don't be afraid to learn from your mistakes.
Embrace the chaos. Use it as fuel for growth and transformation.
Well said. And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into anti-fragility.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the power of anti-fragility.